our last segment this morning, and then we're going to wrap for the day. You know, I was reading a website that I like a lot. A lot of it is kind of on my speed limit, if you will. There's a guy who started this website by the name of Dean Garrison. I like him very much. He's got a website called DC Clothesline, like as in airing out America's dirty laundry. I kind of like the turn on words. And Dean is a pretty good writer. I've read quite a few of his articles. You can get to it by going to dcclothesline.com. And you've seen me post articles from that website before. And he's got some contributing writers and things like that. But he wrote this article that I thought was pretty good. It was called The Letter. And he put it up, I think it was yesterday. So I'm going to spend a minute with you because there's a lesson in this for each of us. And while you may not necessarily agree on the issues in the letter, I want you to just ride with me on this one here and understand the underlying argument of what he's trying to say. Here goes. In 1989, I was playing tennis with a college friend. Back in those days, it was our tradition to have had a few beers and maybe even smoke a little weed and then spend hours on the tennis courts. We weren't contributing much to society or our future, but that's what we did. On that day, my friend confided in me that she was pregnant again and wanted to have an abortion. She actually wanted to borrow the money from me to do it. I couldn't do that even if I wanted to, which I did not. However, I said very little. Rather than explain to her that I thought it was a bad decision, I simply explained to her that I didn't have the money, and eventually she went on to do it. A few months prior to that, my best friend came to me with the same problem. I always had a problem speaking up to this person. He was a strong personality, and I was more of a sidekick than an equal. I always said little or nothing, and he and his girlfriend eventually did have the abortion. Many years later, he would come back to me angry and ask me why I hadn't said something. He was overwrought with guilt. And he explained to me that when he needed tough love from me, when he needed it the most, I didn't provide it. I am and was guilty as charged. There are times that we should have said something and that we should say something, and we do not. Even as 19 and 20-year-old kids, we make decisions that will affect our lives and the lives of those around us forever. We're quick to pass the buck and blame others. After all, I didn't kill either of those babies. Or did I? I certainly could have tried to stop it, but I didn't care enough. I didn't want the confrontation. In my sick mind, a confrontation was not worth the life of a child at that time. It wasn't always like that. Let me fast forward several months to a time when I bumped into that same, quote, tennis player at a mall. We hadn't seen each other much then. We had both dropped out of college, and we were societal deadweight. I was convinced that I was going to make $1 million as a salesman, which I did do many years later. And I am not sure what she was doing, to be completely honest. We were no longer close, and we had drifted apart. I'm not sure what inspired the conversation, but she actually wanted to show me some pictures. They were pictures of her first son, which she had given up for adoption. He was with a very good family, and you could tell that she was happy about that. She knew she had made the right decision. Then she pulled out a letter, and she said, "Do you remember this?" I told her I didn't. But then when she began to unfold the letter and I saw my handwriting, I knew very well what it was. It was a letter I had written to her some 3 years earlier. Even then, I was always a guy who could put my feelings on paper much better than I could force them from my mouth. The letter was my plea for her to not have an abortion. It was written in the fall of 1987. She had carried that letter with her for unknown reasons, but she wanted me to know that she had held it and that it had inspired her in making the right decision with her first pregnancy. I can't tell you the exact contents of the letter, but I distinctly remember offering to adopt the child myself, and I remember telling her that abortion was, quote, murder in cold blood, end quote. I remember heated conversations with her and her boyfriend shortly after I wrote it, and I remember Greg, her boyfriend, telling me, fine, if you want this baby, you can have it. I suppose she held that letter to remind her that once upon a time, someone cared enough about her to say something. And this was written by the same guy who had basically endorsed 2 abortions since in the past year by not saying a thing. To this day, I wonder if her asking me for money was really a cry for a pep talk so that I could tell her again not to do it. She needed support, and I didn't recognize it. I wanted to hide and avoid the confrontation. And the fact that she still carried this letter was proof of that. How quickly we change. I walked away from our brief conversation that day with a huge wake-up call. I will always know that one of my greatest achievements in life was to help save that boy. Today, he's a young man of 26 years old. I also carried with me a huge lesson that hurt like hell. The lesson that I had let 2 babies die when the chances are very good that I might have been able to save them. And I let 2 friends down in the process. I was now part of the problem. One of my worst character defects is that I do not like confrontation. I will do anything I can to avoid it. Over 20 years later, I find myself in a daily hot seat writing about politics, morality, human rights. It might surprise you to know that I have a really thin skin and I take criticism harder than most. A lot of times I can't bring myself to read negative comments because they simply hit me too hard. I am one of those people that wants everyone to like me. It's not going to happen, but if I had my wish, I would climb back into my little shell and almost everyone would love me. I can't be that person anymore. When I am that person, as proven some 25 years earlier, people die. If I don't open my mouth, people will die. This is as true for me as it is for you. It is when we say nothing that the world around us starts to crumble. People around us suffer from every form of broken heart that one can imagine, and more. They need to hear from you. They need to know that somebody cares. For the better part of 25 years, although I had my moments, I sat back and watched as the world crumbled around me. And I simply can't do that anymore. When we open our mouths, miracles will happen and things will change. I'm not saying this is all about abortion. It's not. It's about everything happening in this country today. All of our problems go back to a breakdown of morality. Why are so many bad people populating the halls of government? Because a lot of bad people are electing them. You cannot worry about what everyone else does. You just have to get out there and try to affect the life of one person for the better. If we all did that, then this country would reverse its course much quicker than you might think. I'm very tired this morning, and it probably shows. I'm sorry if this letter is not my best work. but it is important nonetheless. God put you on this earth to do his work. My life's work would have been smoking pot and eating chips if I had my way. But look where that got us. I was not the only one doing that, it would seem. But we can't keep looking the other way. These are desperate times. Rise up and do something. We need you. You know, Dean has captured in that the core principle of a leader of one. You know, leaders make decisions that aren't going to be popular with everyone underneath them, if you will, or everyone within their circle of influence. The job of a leader is not necessarily to curry everyone's favor, but the job of a leader is to stand up and say, this is how we need to move forward, and this is the right path to take. Because there's plenty of people out there that are self-absorbed, foggy from smoking too much pot, playing too much tennis, playing too many video games, or whatever it is that is their escape from reality. But your job as a leader is specifically to lead those who cannot either find the time or the gumption or the chutzpah to get up and take action. Now, I know you're working against incredible odds. Those odds include chemical odds. Chemicals that are the enemy of the nation. I told you before that 50% of all the pharmaceutical drugs manufactured in the world are taken right here in the United States. And we're only 5% of the global population, folks. We are being drugged into a level of submission and suggestibility, submissiveness to suggestion. And then it's reinforced by a ministry of propaganda. It is doing everything in its power to put you back to sleep. Now, there are those of us who have overcome it. Some of us, because we're not taking the drugs. Hello. There might be a good first clue. Some of us just because sheer anger helps us to fight through that blockage. Some of us because we see the monster that is dressed just like us. We see the wolf that's wearing a cowling and a cover that makes it look like a sheep. But I got to tell you, when you point that out to those within your circle of influence, you know, they laugh at you. They ridicule you. They ignore you. Some of them will even go the other way to get away from you. You know, I have this cartoon on our website that I love. It shows a group of sheep standing in a circle, and one sheep is standing there, and he's looking up. And he's looking at the rancher who's standing outside the fence up on a little hill. And next to the rancher is a dog. And the one sheep says, I'm telling you guys, the dog and the man are working together. And the other sheep inside the herd, one of them, you know, there's a little vocal thing over his head, and he says, oh, come on, Trevor, you with the conspiracy theory all the time. But you see, Trevor sees it. Even though everyone else is looking at the same picture, Trevor the sheep, he sees it in a different way. He sees it in a way that either he's willing to admit to himself, and most of the others just keep kind of pushing it away like a bad idea, or he sees it in the stark clarity for what it is when everyone else is blinded by, well, there's grass there to eat. I may as well just get busy. Most Americans have been indoctrinated with the principle of avoiding confrontation. When you were a child growing up in school, every teacher said to you, never handle a problem with another student with violence. Don't raise your voice. Don't yell. Don't get angry. Talk it out. Talk, 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 talk. But you see, the truth is, anger is a natural human response. And to be perfectly honest, violence is a natural human response. You know, the idea that you should get struck by someone else, be it a bully or anybody else, for any reason, and stand and say, I'm not going to fight back because I'm going to be a pacifist, is suicide thinking. Maybe not on the level of, I'm going to put this gun to my head and pull the trigger kind of suicide thinking, but it is suicide nonetheless. I mean, taken to its extreme, it may actually be a physical form of suicide. I watch scenarios where, you know, I see some of these people who are held captive. You know, there's been these cases of in Islamic-controlled countries where, you know, they're sitting there with them all chained together with their hands behind their back, and the guy goes down a line, and they're all kneeling on the ground, and there's a guy walking behind the line just going pow, 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 pow as he walks down the line. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I get it. You're handcuffed to the guy next to you, and, you know, you're really not in a position to fight back. I get it. But if you think for 2 seconds that I would sit there on my knees with my head bowed, waiting for that shot, then you listened too well to the indoctrination machine. Because no matter how remote the chance that I might be able to separate myself from the crowd, that the rope might break, or that others may join me, no matter how remote, the odds are still better than waiting for certain death. But most Americans don't want to be accused of being a phobe. Islamophobe, extremist phobe, fanatic phobe, anti-abortion phobe, gay phobe, homophobe, race phobe, racist. I mean, look, the litany of names and labels that are used to denigrate you, to try to strip you of your power, to be able to speak realistically and rationally, logically, with good reason, the list is this long. Why would you fall for it? Because you're afraid of confrontation? You're afraid of what people might think of you? Well, when I sit there and I watch those people dying like that, I think to myself, that's pretty stupid. That's what I think of them. Stupid. I'm going to die anyway. So at least I'm going to die trying. But you don't want confrontation. You don't want to be added to the list. You don't want your neighbor to say, that guy over there, he's an extremist or something. Well, let me tell you something. There's nothing wrong with being an extremist. Your founding fathers were all extremists. Your grandfather or your father who fought in World War II, he was an extremist. Did you know that? He was an extremist because he stood there on a battlefield, raised a rifle, held it on another person, another human being that he knew was doing evil, and he pulled the trigger. And he watched the blood come out, and he watched the red spray. That's extreme by anybody's estimation or measure. See, extremism is all in the definition of you, not in someone else who's hanging the label on you. Extremism is no more accurate about you than Islamophobe or racist. The truth is, America is afraid of confrontation, and you're all afraid of losing that which you treasure even more than your freedom and the freedom of your children. The crap you hold on to that makes you think you're something or somebody. Your job, your car, your house, the doodads that surround you. That's not life. That's a prison you've modeled life out of, but you're tricking yourself. What is life is your ability to live it in a way in which you make your own decisions. You affect your own course. You're responsible for your own mistakes and failures. You learn from them. And you educate and grow in knowledge. What is freedom is being able to speak out when you see obvious injustice, irrespective of whether that injustice is from one person to another or from government to people. If you cannot speak, and your free speech, your First Amendment right to worship and speak out or redress your grievances with your government, if that's taken from you, you have no freedom. You're not free to do anything. You're a slave. And I'm going to tell you something. The First Amendment was first for a reason. Because violence should never be the first resort. It should always be the last resort. The first resort is the one that says you're free to worship in a way in which you choose, so that you can gain guidance from your beliefs and use those to model and guide and direct your behavior. That you have a right to a press that can publicly say, hey, something's wrong here in the way government is operating. That you have a right to go and collectively get together with other groups of individuals who have the same concerns as you and say, we as a collective voice don't like what you're doing, and we're asking you to change it. The right to redress your grievances with your government. And the right for collective groups of you to get together and raise your voices as one. But when that fails, if you've done everything in your power and it still fails, well, that's when the Second Amendment steps forth to say, we always have this option. And that you should never be willing to give up your life, your liberty, your honor, your self-respect, your self-reliance, your self-determination, your self-esteem. And that if all else fails, you may use that option. That, ladies and gentlemen, is confrontation on a scale that scares the living crap out of all of you. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. Thank you, Dean, for a great letter. Well written, well stated, and I appreciate the message to each of us. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. You can communicate with me directly to Mike at americasvoicenow.org. That's Mike at americasvoicenow.org. Please make sure that you support the sponsors of this program, which you hear about in the breaks in between. Make sure that you visit our friends at batterystation.com. Batterystation.com. And Atlas Survival Shelters. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Have a great day. God bless.